break.
Hello everyone, Alec Elcher the SideQuest Gamer here, and unless you've been living under a rock, you probably know Star Fox 64 as one of the internet's highly praised games. But is it worthy of the praise? I'll answer that question later, but let's get to the review, shall we? Now who am I to decide what truly deserves praise and what truly doesn't? I'll tell you why. I'm the SideQuest Gamer. I've descended from the heavens with a purpose to lead gamers to a point of view of what is good and what is bad in the gaming community. Or I can state that I personally feel the hype of the game doesn't match my personal definition of masterful game design. In my year and a half on YouTube, I've been giving scores to games with a set number out of 100, and the highest grade I've ever given a game was a 98 out of 100. You'll never see a game with a 100 out of 100 score. Even my favorite game of all time is not a 100 out of 100 game, at least not in my opinion. I don't think any game is perfect. I'm often quick to point out the flaws, minor or major, in video games, but try my best to inform the viewer as to why I feel that way, why I feel this is a flaw in a video game, and whether it hinders the fun I've had or not. But I also want to emphasize what I liked or loved about the game to see if it redeemed the flaws. Many of my subscribers have commented on my reviews of games they haven't played before, and many of them are adults with full-time jobs. If they're to buy this game, I want them to decide whether they're getting their money's worth, because the difference between spending $50 on the game they love and $50 on a game they thought was just okay is $50 well spent or $50 lost. And if you work a 9-to-5 job, that's not just money lost, that's one day's pay. That's 1 week where you have to buy generic brand groceries instead of name brand groceries. Also, you can afford to buy the $50 game. So that $50 game better be worth eating Faker oatmeal every day. I may get backlash for pointing out some of the flaws of the classics, and I haven't had a lot of backlash so far, but I'm here to share my personal feelings with a game, not to validate the common wisdom of others. I do try to make an effort to understand the preferences of those who would disagree, and I do appreciate those explaining why they disagree with me, and are polite about it at the same time. Like, I really like Undertale, but I still dislike the fact that it doesn't inform the player on how to get the genocide ending. I've been told it's my fault because I'm not supposed to get the genocide ending due to the game discouraging it. But then why is it a heavily advertised part of the game? Even in the game, with the fight option, it advertises you can either spare or kill the enemy. Telling me I'm not supposed to dislike that aspect of a game for not telling me about the other half of the content. In other words, what half my money went to? But that's how it works on my review show. I share my criticisms and praises, whether they be major or minor, and even Star Fox 64 isn't immune from these criticisms. But let's get to the game. Star Fox 64 is a 3D rail shooter developed and published by Nintendo themselves and released in 1997. No help from Argonaut Software, since Nintendo has been developing 3D games for a couple of years now. The story is basically the same as the first game. In fact, this game is pretty much a reimagining of the first game. Andros is exiled for his dangerous experiments, turning most of Lilat
into a wasteland of near extinction.
Huh, voice acting in a game. Nice touch. So, with the innovative voice acting, the game narrates the story for you, but to sum it up, Andros is angry and builds his empire on Venom. A few years before, he even killed Fox McCloud's father, James, after he and Peppy went to investigate strange activity on the planet Venom. Wait, I thought Fox's father went missing in the Great Black Hole, according to the original Super Nintendo game. Yeah, this game is definitely a remake. I wonder if Star Fox Zero is going to do the same thing to Star Fox 64 as Metroid Zero Mission did to the original Metroid. So years later, Andros launches a full-out invasion on the Lilat system. General Pepper contacts the Star Fox team consisting of the same characters as the previous game, except now they speak English, with some admittedly bad voice acting, but I'll get to that aspect later. And they journey to Venom, fighting Venomians in 7 action-packed levels. In any order you choose. Pretty much the same premise as the previous game, but now Fox and Peppy have a backstory. While Slippy and Falco are not elaborated on much, but they're there with all their personality. As for gameplay, one thing I'd like to point out is that it borrows several elements from the cancelled Star Fox 2 for the Super Nintendo, like Star Wolf Team, the charge and lock-on laser combat mechanic, and most notably, all-range mode. But its method of game progression isn't real-time strategy like in Star Fox 2. Instead, the overworld is rather similar but different to Star Fox 1's map screen. There's an easy, medium, hard route, but rather than choose the route from the start with only detours being the Great Black Hole and out of this dimension, which you would have to go out of your way to find, you have to earn your easy, medium, and hard route. Like in Sector Y, you move on to the hard route level Aquas by shooting down a set number of enemies in the level, but if you don't reach that set number, you're forced to move on to the medium route level Katina. I do like this method of progression in some levels, but how was I supposed to know in Corneria that in order to go to Sector Y, I had to keep Falco alive and fly through the several arches in the water? The game doesn't tell you this. The only way you would know this is keep Falco alive and just, for some reason, just fly through those 7 arches. For no apparent reason, just do it. But for the most part, the game relies on skill. It rewards skilled players with harder experiences and punishes those who aren't as skilled, but I do wish there was more indication and emphasis on how to earn the harder routes. There is subtle hints in some levels, but sometimes the game wouldn't even tell you. With Katina and Fortuna, it's very obvious: protect those bases from destruction. In Sector Z, protect the Great Fox from missiles and accomplish this mission. But if Great Fox is struck by the missile, it's not suited to go to the enemy-heavy Area 6, but instead the more relaxed Bull Station. That makes sense. I just wish for the rail shooting sections it were more obvious, but once you do figure out those requirements by looking them up online or by word of mouth, or even if you have the instructions manual, it's easy sailing from here. As for the levels themselves, I like how some of them are designed, but more often than not I prefer the on-rails segments rather than the all-range modes. Not that all-range mode was bad or anything. I love Fishina, which is called Fortuna in the American Nintendo 64 release. Katina was really fun with the UFO and the dogfights with the other miniature crafts. But Sector Z was really annoying on my first few playthroughs, as when I want to destroy the missiles, they're beyond the edge of the level, and if you're at the edge, you do a U-turn and have to turn around again just to aim at those missiles, yet Falco or Slippy can go beyond the U-turn edge. Why? I can only imagine that level annoying first-time players. And I especially hate Bull Station because that level keeps moving around, making me crash into the poles when aiming, therefore taking damage. And destroying the core in that level is tedious, as the lasers come out of the damaged areas, sometimes hitting you, and you have to turn around and try again to get the exposed undamaged areas, try to destroy them all, and then turn around again to finish it off. And I wish you the best of luck on Venom 2, because Star Wolf is a tough fight, but be sure to use a lot of somersaults and keep the enemy in your crosshairs and keep firing, otherwise you're going to have a really bad time. And if you think charge lasers will affect them, it won't, they'll just do a barrel roll. I remember dying several times on that, my first few playthroughs reaching that point, and don't get me started on the all-range mode fight with the true final boss, which I won't spoil, but boy is it annoying. But all-range mode is good for the most part. It controls fine enough, although I found myself having to turn quickly with barrel rolls because normal turning is rather slow. That's not to say that all the on-rails levels in the game were perfect either. Aquas is by far my least favorite level in the game because of those starfish that explode and the obstacles that come from behind that you wouldn't see coming, and the boss in that level was really annoying, even on further playthroughs. The level Zonus was fine enough, although it's really easy to miss one of the searchlights. If you get caught by one, you've failed the hard route objective and you would have to head for Macbeth instead of Sector Z. Well, unless you do a suicide reset and try again. The controls for this game feel rather smoother than the first game's controls, although I found first-person mode in this game when you hit the up C button to be very disorienting compared to the first. So do yourself a favor and play in third-person mode throughout the whole game. I should also mention that while the lock-on and charge laser is a welcome addition to the franchise, the targeting reticle can sometimes be hard to line up when stationary, most notably in boss battles. It keeps recentering itself, which is annoying when you want to line up the rapid fire shots on an enemy weakness, and the recentering keeps forcing me to tap the control stick in that direction I want it. It's not game-breaking or anything, and I did get used to it, but it is something I did notice. The Nintendo 64 controller is by far one of the worst designed controllers in gaming, but for this game, it did feel natural, like it was made for this game. This game is also the first to be compatible with the Nintendo 64 controller Rumble Pack, but I've honestly never had one, so I couldn't tell you if it made the game more immersive or not. I do think this game controls better on the Wii Virtual Console re-release when using the classic controller, especially with all the C buttons being mapped to the right stick, but either way, it controls fine. The graphics are decent for the most part. I do think the R-Wings and ships look good to this day. While I do like how some of the levels look like Titania and Sector X, I feel like some of the levels like Corneria and Solar have rather ugly looking textures by today's standards, which isn't the game's fault, but it does show there is some dated elements. I will say the graphics look so much better on the 3DS remaster, while this original game looks kind of on par with the first Sonic Adventure, even with character models, because the character models do look and talk like marionette puppets. Maybe that was the intent, because I did hear Miyamoto was a fan of marionette puppets, but they still look rather odd, and every time I watch the credits sequence, I always laugh at Slippy's running animation. I don't know why, but it's just hilarious to watch. The sound direction is an aspect I really want to mention, because the music, to be honest, is not quite as memorable as the original SNES soundtrack. I mean, compared to the fast-paced SNES Corneria with the Star Fox 64 version, it just doesn't compare. Take a look for yourself. I do like how they remixed the Super Nintendo Venom theme for its respective Venom level, and I do like some of the soundtracks in the game, like the Sector X theme, which sounds very mysterious, the famous Area 6 theme, which was used in Super Smash Bros., the epic Starwolf theme, which sounds very sinister, and as much as I hate the level, Aquas at least has an atmospheric soundtrack like you're underwater, but I just don't like a lot of the synthesizer-dominant soundtracks, as it doesn't get me in the mood for flying and shooting things. But soundtrack is a very subjective taste, and they're well composed for the most part. It's just not my cup of tea, and I bet it has its fans out there. Now, as for the elephant in the room, the voice acting. Oh man. Nintendo first attempt at voice acting, it's hilariously cheesy. Let me play a few examples for you.
Don't get too cocky, Star Fox.
Yippee! You did it!
My Emperor! I failed you! Andross's enemy is my enemy. My skill is a reward!
Disrespectful little whelp! I'll teach you some respect.
Quit dinking around, Flip. Doctor, stop it!
In the credits, it lists 7 voice actors, but doesn't list who they each voiced, so I couldn't tell you and critique every voice actor for each character they did. But the voice acting, it's hilariously bad. I love it. I mean, not all of it is the worst voice acting in the world, as the voice actors for some of them sound like they're trying their best, and some of them moved on to much better voice acting roles. I do like the voice of Andross, as he does sound kind of intimidating.
I've been waiting for you, Star Fox. You know that I control the galaxy. Now you will feel true pain.
and the voice actor of Falco really displays the arrogance and hot-headed attitude of the character.
Is that the best you can do? Hey Einstein, I'm on your side! Too late. Game over, pal.
But most of it is just hilarious and laughable, like Castlevania Symphony of the Night levels of hilarious. I should also mention, if you live in Europe, this game is known as Lilat Wars, and for some reason, it has the option to turn on Lilatanese. You know, the language they spoke in the original Star Fox? Why didn't we get that option? The Europeans always get nice things. Although, let's get back to voice acting. With the 3DS version, I was disappointed that the voice actors would emulate their original recordings. I would have liked to see Star Fox 64 3D get this Castlevania Symphony of the Night Dracula X Chronicles treatment, where they redone the voice acting, but it's more believable. I will say the sequels do a much better job with voice acting, especially Assault. I mean, it's still not great, but it's a lot better than 64. By the way, am I the only one who really likes Star Fox Assault? Sure, it's not as good as the first two games, but it's still a good game in its own right. So let's ask the question I asked before. Is it deserving of the praise it gets? Yes and no. Yes, because even to this day, it's one of the best games on the Nintendo 64 console. Minor complaints aside, I found this game extremely fun to play. While it does have the beaten one sitting mentality and ditch the continue system the previous game had, it's a pretty short game that could be beaten under an hour if you know what you're doing. And no, because this game is overrepresented to the point where people say it's the only Star Fox game to ever exist and don't give the SNES game or Assault a fair chance. It's been shown in 2 Super Smash Bros. Games, and it's the only Star Fox game to get a Virtual Console re-release. Is it overrated? I don't know, but I will say this, it is one of my favorite games of all time, but that doesn't mean it's immune from criticism when it warrants it. I am glad I replayed this game, as I forgot how much fun it was to replay from time to time, and I was afraid, like the first Crash Bandicoot, it wouldn't be as good as I remembered it. But I was wrong. It's just as good as I remembered it to be. With a few bumps in the road, but minor bumps. And overall, I would give this game a 96 out of 100. It is not flawless, but it is an excellent game for what it is. It's definitely not for everyone, but I do know it's for me. And if you have $10, why not give it a download on the Wii U eShop? But if you have $20, get the superior 3DS version. Better graphics, improved remix soundtrack, same cheesy voice acting, and more accessible to new gamers. That's Star Fox 64 for the Nintendo 64, and thank goodness it's as good as I remembered it. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, remember to...
Do a barrel roll!